Well, good morning and welcome to the Port of Corpus Christi's second annual Energy Day Speaker Series. Today's speaker series is entitled Navigating the Global Energy Economy and Transition. I'm honored to have such a distinguished group of speakers, including members of the Texas Congressional Delegation, Energy Export Caucus, and energy industry leaders. Thank you all for participating and for your support of the Port of Corpus Christi and certainly the great state of Texas. I also want to give a thank you to our co-sponsors of this event, the American Fuel and Petrochemical Manufacturers Association, the Texas Alliance of Energy Producers, the American Petroleum Institute, the Texas Oil and Gas Association, and ClearPath. Finally, thank you to all of our attendees out there. I'm excited to be here with you today to discuss the importance of American natural gas and oil that drives employment opportunities and economic growth in our country. Let me give you a very quick overview of our agenda today. First, we're going to hear from our very own Congressman Michael Cloud. We're going to have a fireside chat on the state of the Texas energy industry from Todd Staples, president of Texoga. We're going to hear from members of Congress on the energy exports in the Biden administration panel. And we're also going to listen to a great panel on the global demand for clean and renewable energy. Let me give you all a little bit of some housekeeping as well. For our audience members out there who'd like to submit questions, you can do so in the chat panel on the right of your screen. And please note that we are recording this event. Now, I'd like to give you all some opening remarks. As one of the largest export gateways of American energy, the Port of Corpus Christi thought it was critical at this time to assemble leading voices from both the political and the business community to assess the state of the global energy economy and its transition. This is certainly an important issue for the Port of Corpus Christi, as Texas has become the cornerstone of American energy production. And certainly Texas ports, including the Port of Corpus Christi, where I have the privilege of being the CEO, have become our nation's primary gateways for global markets who have an appetite for Texas energy. Texas energy infrastructure, notably ports, production facilities, processing facilities, and certainly pipelines, will play a vital role and are already playing a vital role in the recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, as we're seeing demand for crude oil and natural gas growing exponentially as people are returning to work. You know, the United States has now become a net exporter of its energy production for the first time in 70 years. And to keep pace with growing demand for hydrocarbons and for growth in energy, Texas is expanding infrastructure on multiple fronts. Our energy infrastructure covers the entire waterfront, from the production fields and the extraction technologies that have been employed in these fields, to the pipelines that move those molecules to the coast where they are processed and ultimately exported to our allies and trading partners around the world. And right here at the Port of Corpus Christi, we recently announced phase 3 of our 4-phase Corpus Christi Ship Channel Improvement Project. This is a project that's been 30 years in the making and is a collaboration between the Port of Corpus Christi, the United States Army Corps of Engineers, and the federal government. This project includes the recent award of a $139 million construction contract to what is now a Texas company, Great Lakes Dredge and Dock Company. It's a significant extension and a visible improvement for both safety and efficiency by allowing two-way traffic and the safer passage for the larger deep draft vessels. The port has also a tremendous economic impact in Texas, creating jobs and contributing billions of dollars in economic activity to the state and the nation. We've been responsible for over $150 billion of economic output each year for the nation, as well as $20 billion of that right here in the great state of Texas. But as we know, our industry is currently in the midst of a global transition. Growth of the global renewable energy markets is mainly attributable to increased emissions of greenhouse gases and the commitment from sovereignties all over the planet to reduce these emissions through energy transition initiatives and innovation in carbon reduction technologies. As industry leaders, we all share a responsibility to dramatically reduce our carbon footprint. Recently, right here at the Port of Corpus Christi, in conjunction with our industry partners, we've curated efforts to stay proactive in serving as environmental stewards in Texas, meeting our ESG goals, and encouraging the use of alternative fuel sources and carbon capture and storage initiatives. The energy transition, climate change, and a growing demand for energy exports, along with this needed critical infrastructure, will all play a vital role in enabling large-scale investments in both developed and emerging economies. There will certainly be challenges, but there will also be vast opportunities as well. And this is the nature of our business, and the political and business leaders in Texas will be at the forefront in charting our course forward. And I have some of those political and business leaders with us here today, so please join me in tuning in right now for some opening remarks from our very own Congressman Michael Cloud, who represents the Texas 27th District right here on the Gulf Coast. Unfortunately, Congressman Cloud had a last-minute obligation and is not able to attend live, but he has sent along the following video greeting.
Hello, this is Congressman Michael Cloud, and I wanted to thank you for being a part of the second annual Texas Energy Day. There is no more perfect place to have this event than in Corpus Christi, home to America's leading energy export port. America leads the world when it comes to energy innovation, and Texas leads America when it comes to production. For starters, practices like fracking and horizontal drilling have helped increase oil and gas production. Over the last several decades, strides have been made in improving renewable energy, technology, and infrastructure. New technologies have enabled producers to capture more oil and gas, requiring less inputs. America has a carbon advantage relative to the world when it comes to energy production. And as the world recovers from the pandemic, America should seize on this opportunity to export more of our energy to other countries. Because we produce energy more efficiently, policies should be made that prioritize promoting U.S. energy exports throughout the world. Global greenhouse emissions can be reduced as a result of more countries using more American energy. So I continue to caution leaders that are intent on implementing policies that limit U.S. fossil fuel production. In terms of national security, America must have a steady supply of energy. Our energy supply should not be placed in the hands of nations like Russia and China. Already, we're seeing the power that Russia wields over Europe's energy supply by limiting natural gas shipments to European countries. This has caused natural gas prices to rise for other European nations. If American energy production is not made a priority, other countries will dictate energy policy for our nation and also set the cost of living for Americans. This is already happening in Europe, with leaders from European Union expressing concerns over how something as essential as the price of natural gas is going to drive up the cost of food. Fossil fuels are a key component to so many things we need: fertilizer, plastics, fabric, and so much more. With America importing more energy than we export, not only will American families' monthly income be dedicated to the electricity, but the cost of food and other goods will also rise. The two industries of oil and gas have supplied hundreds of thousands of jobs for Americans and made America an economic powerhouse, helping reduce poverty throughout the world. Business development is a basic requirement for developing countries to advance economically, and reliable electricity and energy is a basic requirement for business development. American energy exports can be a key to boosting our economic dominance and reducing global poverty. I want to thank you for the work that you do in developing American energy. Reliable energy is vital to the health of our families and our communities, the economic development of our communities, and our national security. So thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you for being here today. God bless you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jerry Sullivan. I work with Edelman. We're a global communications firm who has had the great opportunity to work with Sean and the team there at the Port of Corpus Christi. And we're excited about today's program for Texas Energy Day. I'll serve as your MC, so I will keep my comments to a minimum. But I think Sean would agree with me that next year we hope to be doing this in person so we can actually raise a cup of coffee or an adult beverage and get to know one another. So with that said, I'd like to turn it back over to Sean, who's going to be talking to Todd Staples a little bit about the challenges and opportunities ahead. So with that, back to you, Sean.
Thank you, Jerry. And you're absolutely right. This is our second annual event. We are certainly looking forward to the third one in person next year in Washington, D.C. And we invite all of you who are joining us remotely to put it on your calendar for next year. We'll certainly get you the dates, and we're looking forward to fellowship, networking, and certainly information exchange in person next year in Washington, D.C. Now I'd like to welcome a prominent leader in the Texas oil and gas sector. He's going to join me for a fireside chat on the role of domestic energy and what it will play in rejuvenating global economies and our national economy, the ongoing increase in energy demand and necessary infrastructure in the state of Texas. And, we're seeing some interesting dynamics in the energy space right now. And there's nobody that's more front and center than my good friend, Mr. Todd Staples. Todd is the president of the Texas Oil and Gas Association, the state's oldest and largest trade association, representing every facet of the oil and gas industry, including small independents, major producers, pipeline operators, and refineries. Prior to serving as president of Texoga, he served 2 terms as the Texas Commissioner of Agriculture. Additionally, he served admirably with distinction as a member of the Texas Senate from 2001 to 2007, and the Texas House of Representatives from 1995 to 2001. Todd, it's so great to have you and see you here today. What do you say we dive right in, shall we?
That sounds good, Sean. Good to be with you.
Great to see you, sir. So, Todd, Texas has long been a driving force in America's energy sector. What role do you see Texas playing in the future energy landscape?
Well, Sean, I think Texas is uniquely positioned to continue to play a leading role in the energy landscape of the future. I think the key word, though, here this morning to focus on is we have the potential to play a leading role. And I think about that because it doesn't matter if you're in politics, you're in sports, you're in business. Just because you're successful today does not mean that translates automatically to success in the future. So as we think about the future, I think it's very important that we recognize that oil and natural gas are irreplaceable today. And we know that oil and natural gas are irreplaceable for the energy of tomorrow as well. But society has expectations about this industry. I'm very glad to report that oil and natural gas companies are responding to these expectations. They are introducing operational efficiencies. They're embracing innovation and technology. They are charting a course to play a leading role in the future energy landscape that the world needs: affordable, reliable energy. And it's exciting to see how this is coming about. We know that there are concerns about our climate. Oil and natural gas companies are embracing innovation and technology to do 2 things. One, to provide a lower emissions future for oil and gas, but to also adopt an all of the above energy approach as they explore new energies and using the current energy to be the energy of the future. One thing Sean, I'm convinced of is that whatever the energy source is of tomorrow, Texas oil and natural gas companies that are providing energy today will be providing that energy tomorrow.
Yeah, your point about just because we're successful today doesn't mean we're going to be successful tomorrow. And as a great Aggie who just came off an epic win over Alabama, that doesn't mean that A&M can't take their eye off the ball for this game next week. So along that line, how can Texas stay ahead of the curve and continue to be seen as an innovative leader in the nation's energy transformation?
Well, I'm sure glad we talked about Aggie football because that needs to be a part of every conversation here for a while. But you bring up a good point. I mean, if you think about the SEC, we're competing with Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi. Georgia and North Carolina want in on the action of competition for economic development. And so when I think about energy transformation or the term energy transition, Sean, to you and I, that term might mean something very well defined. I think to the general public, it's a little bit ambiguous today. There are many out there who would suggest that the energy transformation is a shift completely away from oil and natural gas. As I said previously, oil and natural gas are absolutely irreplaceable today, and they will continue to play a strong role. So the energy transformation is about providing that product that the world demands, affordable, reliable energy, and employing techniques that are being developed. Carbon capture, use, and storage is at the forefront of every company's conversation. Methane emission reduction is at the forefront of the planning strategy. Reducing routine flaring, that is the industry has adopted a goal to incorporate that. Many companies are already reached the level of ending routine flaring in their operations today. And so that's what the energy transformation and the energy transition is all about. We know that jobs are important and that tax policy is equally important as we think about the future and where we're going, and that needs to be at the forefront of every discussion.
Yeah, and public policy, absolutely critical, both at the federal and the state level. And I don't have to tell you this, but there's fewer places in the world that have a bigger concentration of energy experts than right here in Texas. How can we as Texans best use this bountiful resource of expertise, not only to really power the energy revolution, but to stimulate our local and national economies and spur continuous job creation?
Sean, I think you hit the nail on the head. We do have talent here in Texas, and we need to capitalize on that. At the Texas Oil and Gas Association, we have standing committees of the best minds in the world that come together to focus on solutions, whether there are water challenges, whether there are, how to best manage environmental issues, all those type things are coming together. But a part of that, I think you mentioned policy. Competitive tax policy is important. I want to go back to that for just a moment, because as a former Texas Commissioner of Agriculture, I had the opportunity to travel the United States, look at what other states were doing, and Sean, they're hungry. I mean, these other states are trying to position themselves to where they can lead and be an economic powerhouse, and good for them, because competition raises the bar and makes us all perform at a higher level. But when we think about Texas, capital is intensive, and it is very competitive, and where you can get the best return on investment and where you're going to place those resources, whether that be in a competing state in the United States or in a competing country around the globe. And so in looking at Texas policy, we know that property taxes are an extremely high burden, and they are a disincentive to locating projects in the state of Texas. And so as we think about moving forward, we must have an Economic Competitiveness Act for Texas. We have to have a way that we can bring these jobs, recruit the brightest talent in the world, and make certain that Texas is home for it. And here's why it's important to everyone that sends a child to school. It's important to every Texan that gets on our roadways, is because this industry paid last year almost $14 billion in state and local taxes and state royalties. This industry employed directly over 400,000 Texans with a job, with an indirect impact of about 2 to 2.5 million jobs. So this industry is playing an important role in the economic foundation of Texas, and we have to make certain that our tax policy is competitive. I think that's a key to accomplishing your question there.
Todd, I mean, I always love hearing you speak. You're certainly a great advocate for the home team and the state of Texas. And if we're going to remain competitive, there's a lot of talk in DC about this bipartisan infrastructure package, the BIP. And infrastructure plays certainly a critical role in the energy sector, regardless of if it's fossil fuels or renewable energy. It's all infrastructure. And I know here at the Port of Corpus Christi, and certainly Texas ports in general, we are infrastructure plays, and we are working diligently to invest in the needed improved infrastructure to make our customers more competitive. But what other infrastructure investments are needed in Texas and throughout the country, for that matter, to ensure we stay ahead of the energy curve, remain competitive, and create the energy landscape for tomorrow?
Well, Sean, I want to congratulate you and the Port of Corpus Christi, because you have been on the tip of the spear in talking about infrastructure. And as I think about that, that is fundamental to growing every sector of the Texas economy, and to making certain that our nation can be competitive as we move forward. Obviously, midstream transportation is essential. Storage is essential. We also know that our transportation, our highways, our road, getting it that last mile is an essential element of it. Telecommunications, broadband, high-speed internet access. When I think about our growth and our opportunities and what that energy landscape of the future it must be, I think about that broad, essential infrastructure. There's something that Texans know about, and that's how to recover from storms. You all face it at the port there. Anytime there's a major event coming in off the Gulf, we faced it during Winter Storm Uri this last February. Every aspect of infrastructure is essential, and energy security is having that broad access to infrastructure and that investment of infrastructure. So I think we need to continue to think about it in broad terms, think about it in every aspect, because you can have the best roads in the world. If you can't communicate, it doesn't matter. You can have the best midstream infrastructure in the world, and we do. But if you cannot get it that last mile, or if you have telecommunications challenges, there's problems. So we need to think and keep at the forefront infrastructure development.
Well, Todd, you've been a great advocate for this industry. You've been a great representative for the people of Texas. I want to thank you again for your time today. We appreciate all your hustle, and I look forward to another exchange with you real soon. Keep up the great work, partner.
We'll do it. Thanks, Sean. Take care.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sean and Todd. Some great insight there on energy and on college football. I'm sure we're going to be getting a few more tips from Sean as we go through here today. But next up, we have our first panel, which is actually very exciting. We're going to talk about the energy exports in the Biden administration. And the conversation is going to be led by a good friend of ours, Corey Paul, who's the energy reporter for S&P Global Market Intelligence, one of the leading publications on the energy sector. And I'm going to hand it over to Corey, and he can introduce what I think is a very stellar panel from Congress. So, Corey, over to you.
Excellent. Yes, we have, as our panelists, we have Texas Republicans, Representative Tony Gonzalez and Representative Michael Burgess. We are also joined by two members of the House Export Caucus, Republican Representative Carol Miller of West Virginia and Texas Democratic Republican Henry Cuellar. Welcome everyone. Let's get right into it. So there are several notable climate provisions in the infrastructure and social and climate policy legislation being considered by Congress. The House reconciliation bill, as you guys all know, has a proposed methane fee, and the Senate is considering a carbon tax. Can you share some perspective with us on the prospects of either of these proposed fees advancing, and how might carbon pricing affect the competitiveness of U.S. energy exports? Let's maybe start with Representative Miller, if she wants to take a bite at that one.
Well, quite frankly, I'm not interested in a lot of high taxes. I'm very interested in carbon capture. So I would like to see how we are proceeding forward. We can produce lots and lots of bills, but of course, it depends upon the Democrats to take those bills up. And we seem to be on different pages entirely on energy in general. So I think I'd rather bat that one over to Henry to hear what his opinion is on what we can do in that stratosphere, so to speak.
Sure. Representative Cuellar, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I was going to pass it on to Tony Gonzalez.
We have a standing deal. I take all the hard ones and Henry takes all the easy ones.
Tony, how are you, buddy? And Carol and Michael. And, when I was in the state legislature, I have to say this, I said I wanted to grow up to be like Todd Staples. So I'm still working on trying to be like Todd Staples. So again, it was good seeing Todd right before this. Look, there's two pieces of legislation. One of them is the infrastructure bipartisan bill that I certainly support because it will bring about $30 billion to the state of Texas directly for our roads, our bridges, and things that we need to work on, including some monies to cap some of the old oil wells that might be leaking at this time. So there is some good bipartisan legislation there, and I want to see a vote as soon as possible. The reconciliation, I have a problem with the size. I was not in the room when somebody came up with $3.5 trillion. I was not in that room. And when you come up with an amount of 3.5, all you're doing is you come up with a number and then you fill it up with taxes and you fill it up with spending. And that's not the way Tony and I, for example, we're in appropriations. We don't do that. You look at what your needs are, and then you see if you can afford those particular needs. On that one, on the reconciliation, at least on the Democrat side, I led the effort to make sure that there were no targeted taxes on the oil and gas. So we were successful on that part. On the methane gas, I'm against that. I'd rather find another way. I've been working with API and other folks to get rid of that. And certainly, like my co-chair, Carol said, we're working on technology for carbon capture or methane emissions to target using technology. And if you look at what the oil and gas companies have done, they've done a good job. And I just find it very ironic as a Democrat that we say no to the Keystone, but then we say yes to the Nord Stream, which is wrong. That's a wrong position. And then the other thing, just to close up, is we're trying to reduce the production of oil and gas, which we need here for jobs and for independence. But then we're asking OPEC to produce more. And again, I think our production is a lot cleaner than some other countries on that. So I certainly want to find a way that we can find balance on this reconciliation proposal, because again, I was not in the room when somebody came up with this particular number.
Well said.
So you had mentioned the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and I'm glad you did. As you mentioned, this would rebuild a lot of the nation's roads and bridges and fund new climate resilience and broadband initiatives. I'm wondering if any of our other panelists besides Representative Cuellar would like to kind of weigh in with some thoughts on what passage of the BIF, as some people are calling it up in DC, would mean for your district.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. Look, I believe in infrastructure. I think on the Republican side, I think many of us believe in infrastructure. If we're talking about roads and bridges, even broadband, I mean, there's many parts of Texas in particular that are being left behind. There's this urban and rural divide that is getting wider and wider. And a large part of that is because of the broadband, the lack of broadband in many areas. But the problem I have is, sadly, anytime something starts to make sense, it gets hijacked. And sadly, the infrastructure package has gotten hijacked and almost sewn together with the reconciliation package. So we're no longer just talking about infrastructure. And that's where the issue starts to unravel. But there's no doubt that there's things that we need beyond the traditional aspect of it. I think land ports is another one. Trade and commerce helps the trade and commerce on that. And then of course our seaports as well. I mean, you're seeing off the coast of California, you're seeing all these ships just burning holes in the ocean. Like all of these things can be improved from an infrastructure standpoint if we were only talking about that. But when you add the reconciliation, you add all the dangerous things in that bill that aren't, it's not about, I want an industry to be a little more efficient, or it has nothing to do with it. It's I want an industry gone. I want the oil and gas industry gone and replaced with something else. That is dangerous. So when you do that and you put the two bills together, is where I and many Republicans go, this is where we exit.
Yeah. This is
Okay, go ahead.
Mike Burgess here. Look, I live in a part of the state up in the northern part of Texas, and infrastructure needs are critical here. They have been for some time. We're a rapidly growing part of the state. I think I've got about 250,000 more constituents than I am supposed to right now, just indicative of how the number of families moving to this area. when I approached the Secretary of Transportation about in the early going on the infrastructure bill and asked him about specifics on projects for North Texas, he said, we're not developing that degree of granularity. And that then becomes a problem for me. And even if you look at the surface transportation bill that passed out of the House earlier this year, that then became I guess the basis for the conference with the Senate, it focused on eliminating traditional energy sources and subsidizing others. And you know, for right now, for what the needs of the constituents that I represent, we need to get back to doing just a basic surface transportation bill. Yes, there are federal gas taxes that are collected each year. They're in the Highway Trust Fund. We need to be talking about how we take care of our roads and bridges. We need more lane miles of concrete in some areas of the state. So why we shun those activities, I don't quite understand. So even just the bipartisan infrastructure bill, I would have a difficult time supporting. But then, of course, when it's Henry is quite correct, when you couple it with the larger reconciliation package, there's no way that you're going to get any Republican support. But even the surface transportation bill, I in fact worried about it a couple of weeks ago. I thought, well, they've got everything they need to get this passed, and it's already passed the Senate. If they don't change anything, it goes right down to the White House for a signing ceremony. But there were problems in just the transportation, or I should say the infrastructure bill, as it came to has not yet come back to the House from the Senate. But when it does, there are problems there. I've got the whole thing on my desk. I'm going through it, trying to figure out, is there some reason to be for this? So far, I haven't found it.
Okay, I will pipe in now that we've generalized the question somewhat. Living in the state of West Virginia, which has got incredible, abundant natural resources with coal, natural gas, and oil, timber, all of these wonderful things. I am not experiencing having too many people in my district. As a matter of fact, my state has done nothing but lose population once we did bad policy, eliminating a certain type of energy, but by bad policy, as opposed to letting the natural progression of energy move forward. And, I can use examples of, I have one county in my district that had over 100,000 people in it, and there are 10,000 people there because they had to leave looking for other jobs. And that's why when the first thing that happens under the Biden administration, when they close down a pipeline and you lost 10,000 jobs there, 300 of those were from my district, and they had to come home because there was no work. And, we have to be smart. When I was in the state legislature, a bill had to pertain to what the subject of the bill was. If this was just an infrastructure bill, it would be terrific, but it's not. And I'm also serving on the budget committee as well as Ways and Means, as part of Ways and Means, I should say, and trade. And, when I looked at our budget in 1965, only a third of our budget was dealt with mandates and programs and things that were started by Congress. We're up to 70% of our budget already being beholden to all of these mandates and that we have passed in the federal government. Within another 5 years, it'll be 75%. And when you talk about 3.5 trillion or 4.3 trillion, I've got to say absolutely not, because we are not being good stewards of our money, as well as our environment, as well as people's lives. And our energy industry has provided so much to so many people and lifted a lot of the world out of poverty, as well as our own. And, I remember when we were energy dependent, and by golly, we were energy independent just a year ago. And by golly, I very strongly believe in our natural resources and doing them well, but not signing on to obscenely large chunks of money going out.
Yeah, thank you. It's going to be very interesting to see how the next few months go. I think there's a lot to work through and a lot of uncertainty. So since we were on an exports panel, I think I would be remiss if I didn't bring up this global gas shortage right now and the insane prices that we are seeing. Our US LNG industry, which really has only begun exporting to foreign markets in 2016, has been, running the 6 active facilities we have at close to full bore for the better part of the year. At the same time, we've seen domestic gas prices increase to around $6-ish per MMBTU, partly because of these exports. It's at least price supportive. In response to this, an industrial manufacturers group has urged the Department of Energy to put limits on US LNG exports. You have other groups that have made similar arguments in the past about reversing the ban on crude. But in any case, how much of a concern is this dynamic for you? And do you see a real chance of putting federal limits on exports because of domestic prices? Maybe we can start with Representative Burgess on that one. Oh, you're muted, sir. I'm sorry.
Pardon. I thank you for the question. I think you've identified what is a significant potential problem. Of course, it would be the wrong answer to the question. And I, for one, having lived through the time when there were the bans on the export of crude oil and exports of natural gas, I would not want to see that reinstituted. We have, of course, more natural gas than we know what to do with in the Permian Basin. And I would rather focus on federal policies that would help bring that. I refer to it as like our Texas Railroad Commissioner, Jim Wright. He came up with the term stranded gas that can't get out of where the production is occurring. But he's also identified a multiplicity of abandoned pipelines that are already in existence that could be used to transport that natural gas to either population centers where it could be used to generate electricity, or to ports where it could be exported. So I think, rather than put a curtailment on our ability to develop commerce, I think perhaps it would be a wiser course. Let's see what we can do about getting the product that we already have to a place where it is marketable.
Thank you. How about you, Representative Cuellar? Is the political case for LNG exports, which was in part, we have all this cheap, abundant resources, is that changing a little bit as this becomes a bigger and bigger driver of our U.S. production?
Yeah, I'm with Michael Burgess on this. He's absolutely right. Back in 2015, Congressman Joe Barton and myself took the lead, and we passed the legislation on the House side, went over to the Senate to lift the ban on oil export. So I've been working on that. I mean, this is a very important issue. I don't want to go back to pre-2015. And then in December of 2015, that legislation got added to the omnibus appropriation bill. We in appropriations, I think Tony and I know this, that you're not supposed to legislate on appropriations, but at the end of the year, when it's the only train moving, you add legislation. So we added that legislation to the appropriations in December 2015. Then in January, the first export that came under that law started in my area, the Eagle Ford, went off to to Corpus Christi, and then from there it went off to Europe. So I don't want to go back, as Michael said, back to the pre-2015. I think we need to let the market forces work. Michael, I also talked to Commissioner Wright, and you're right. There's a lot of abandoned, and I've seen the maps. I'm sure that he showed the maps to you, and then maybe to Tony Gonzalez also. And I would suggest, Tony and Mike, that we all work together with Commissioner Wright to see how we can get those abandoned pipes so we can get the stranded gas to the places that they need to go. And if you look at that map, that the commissioner, the railroad commissioner, showed us. It's amazing, and there is some infrastructure that I think we can use to alleviate some of the issues. But to go back and amend the export ban, I would say heck no to that.
So you've achieved a rare point of bipartisan breakthrough here. Henry, I did have language that I developed as an amendment to Title A in the reconciliation bill that came through Energy and Commerce. I'll be developing that into standalone legislation on the concept of stranded gas and abandoned pipelines. So I'll look to you and Tony Gonzalez for your help with that.
Yeah.
And we'll try to get that moving.
Yeah, we'll work with you to get that legislation, and then Tony and I will add that to the appropriations bill at the end of the year to get it passed.
No,
Yes,
you don't
yes.
legislate on appropriations bills. Carol and I are humble authorizers. We have no other activity in life than to authorize things. Don't take that away from us. We get no buildings named after us, no bridges named after us. The appropriators take all the glory.
Well, that's what Joe Barton said, and guess what? It got added to the appropriations in December 2015. But anyway, I look forward to working with you. I think you and I and Tony and Carol, if you were down here in Texas, we will work with you. But I think we need to look at this. Mike, you're absolutely right. I think what Commissioner Wright has is a very good idea. And let's work with them on that. And Tony and Mike, I look forward to working with you on this.
Let's maybe step back and take 1,000-foot view for a second, since there's broad consensus on our panel here for maintaining robust exports. The U.S. has been a net total energy exporter in 2019 and in 2020. What role do you see domestic energy playing in rejuvenating the economy moving forward? And maybe we'll start with Representative Gonzalez on this one.
I'm sorry, was that me? It froze a little bit.
Yeah, do you mind?
Yeah, okay, I figured as much. Yeah, no, I think, when you talk about exports, I see an opportunity. I see an opportunity for the industry, or the oil and gas industry, to shine, right? To really shine, because the reality is we have a lot of natural resources at our that can be developed further, that can be more efficient. I think too, when you start talking about the larger picture of climate change, and that's another area, where the oil and gas industry can shine, where we can go, look, if we first, we have to be energy independent, no doubt, right? That's critical. That's critical to both the economy, but I'd argue it's critical to national security as well. So we absolutely have to have energy independence. But the more exports that we have, especially in the natural gas realm, the more opportunities it provides us, one, as a nation, but two, as a planet, to be able to clean up some of these emissions. Next month I'll be traveling to a few different places. One of those is India, and I think India is a great possibility of really expanding natural gas exports that would make sense both to them, that would make sense to us, and it would make sense to the world as far as cleaning up emissions. So when you hear all this talk of climate change and some initiatives, I mean, natural gas, I think, can be a big part of that solution if we are to lean forward on it. Develop some of these relationships, like with India and other large nations that have large emissions. I think there's an opportunity to do that, but it requires leadership, and that leadership starts in the House of Representatives, and then I think from there that the White House can be able to take something on.
Okay, so on trading relationships, Representative Miller, can you talk about a little bit what the Export Caucus is doing to ensure the U.S. is taking a leading role in energy production and in the development of kind of cleaner energy and cleaner energy technologies, towards advancing the energy transition?
Well, we are reaching out to so many countries. So I'm glad to hear the comments about India, because we have reached out. I know I've personally talked to over 47 ambassadors expressing our interest in trade in general, and particularly with the EU. And there have been some bills that have come out, the Escape Act and a few others that will require that the NATO, that the NATO countries, that we start basically looking out for each other. And, our energy independence is national security. And when you see that the EU and Germany in particular, and they're buying all this dirty gas from Russia, our natural gas in the United States is so much cleaner that, if we actually sold as much LNG to Germany as Russia, we would be cleaning up the environment so much more. It just falls into what we are hearing as a nation that we all want to do, which is to have, cleaner environment. And so we have reached out across the board to many countries, letting them know that we are willing to trade with them and sell them our natural gas, because it is the cleanest way right now to power as much as we need to power.
Excellent. So we've had an audience question that I will sneak in real quick because it relates to a couple of the points you guys have made. Our questioner is asking about some of these calls, mostly I think from activist groups for the US and other energy exporting nations to limit fossil fuel exports as a means of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And again, this could include Biden declaring some kind of emergency to ban crude exports again, or for FERC to limit construction of more LNG terminals. Our viewer is curious in your reaction to some of those calls, and then I have a follow-up.
Yeah, if I can maybe answer that, because I have to, after this answer, I have to hang up. I have, one of the big announcements for the state of Texas and for the rest, as you know, the border restrictions, Tony, because Tony and I represent a lot of border areas. The border restrictions allowing Mexicans to come in, the legal visa holders of Mexicans that before the pandemic, 18 million would come into the US and spend $19 billion. That's going to be lifted in November. They have to show vaccination proof to come in. That applies to Mexicans and Canadians, and that's good for our local economies that we have. So I have to hang up, but let me just say this. Activists have been, I don't think it's only the exports. I think they want to stop production of oil and gas. And that's one thing that we have to look at. I mean, keep in mind that 65% of the $21 trillion economy that we have is the energy supply is supplied by oil and gas. So it's important for us for jobs. It's important for us independence, like all my colleagues have said. But, it's interesting. I'll give you two stories how people just don't understand the impact of oil and gas to our economies. I had some of those protesters come to my office 2 weeks ago. So I asked some of the folks, hey, I was in DC voting. I said, hey, can you show me if they rode a bicycle or did they go on a skateboard? And guess what? All the protesters came in their cars up there. So they forget that. Also, Michael, and I don't know if y'all remember this, a couple of years ago, we had some protesters that had glued their hands on the glass doors on the tunnels going where the trains are at, so they could yell and scream at the members of Congress, and they were protesting, quote, fossil fuels again. So when I was going by some of them that had their hands glued to the glass doors, I said, I don't know if you know this, but that glue is made out of petroleum products, and so you're protesting something that you're using. And a lot of people don't understand petroleum, where it's plastics or whatever. There's so many things that come in from the fossil fuel. So we got to make sure that, the industry does a better job along with us, all of us, to talk about jobs, the why we need to keep that independence. And why so many products come in, so many products are produced out of the oil and gas industry. So I certainly want to work with Tony and with Carol, my co-chair in the Export Caucus, and Michael Burgess, especially on that legislation that Michael talked about. But I'll close with this. When we look at other countries that we need to work on, we got to look at Mexico. The border is not the only thing we need to talk to Mexico about, but they're doing some restrictions to our energy companies across the river in Mexico that I think we all need to start playing a role on that aspect, because I don't like the direction that Mexico is taking against our energy companies, American energy companies in Mexico. So we got a lot of work to do. And certainly I want to thank you as the moderator, and I want to thank Michael, Carol, Tony, for being part of the panel. I have to go because, this border issue, Tony, as you know, is going to be good news for all of us, border economies. So with that, to my folks in Corpus Christi and other places, I want to say thank you so much. And I look forward to working with you as a team with Carol, Tony, and Michael on that. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for joining us, Congressman.
Thank you.
So there seems to be agreement kind of among people who are knowledgeable about these issues, right? That some sort of executive ban by fiat on production or exports could have severe economic consequences, energy security consequences for us and our allies, and energy diplomacy consequences, mostly all bad. But let me kind of get at this emissions issue in a different way. And that's basically to ask, is there a case to be made that stronger federal controls on greenhouse gas emissions through the oil and gas supply chain could help make exports of US energy products more competitive, especially in some of these end user markets that have more aggressive emissions reductions targets, such as our friends in Europe? I'm sure most of our Texas delegation here is mindful of a major French utility pulling out of a multi-billion-dollar deal with tied to Next Decade Corp's terminal in South Texas over concerns about supply chain emissions associated with gas produced in the Permian. As lawmakers, what's kind of the right balance here in terms of federal policy to drive down emissions reductions versus just industry alone efforts?
So if I could, this is Burgess, if I could talk about that for a second. Todd Staples, in his segment prior to ours, talked about Texas having the greatest concentration of energy experts in the world. And I think he's right. And I think utilize that experience, utilize that concentration of expertise. Look, the one thing that has achieved sort of bipartisan agreement here this morning is perhaps we do need to think about a better way of treating natural gas that's produced at the field, in the Permian Basin. That can be looked at as product, that can be looked at as something that can be marketed rather than something that is just flared off into the atmosphere. I think that is, if you want to look at probably what is the largest source, it would be that. There are other areas where flaring could perhaps be controlled. There are other areas where maintenance could prevent the escape of methane that has already been produced, that is now being transported through a pipeline or some other mechanism. But at the same time, the largest concentration would be at the wellhead site, and that would be located in the Permian. So that is the greatest return for investment, for my estimation right now, would be following through on what Commissioner Wright has already suggested to us. I think you do always have to be careful. You open the door to new regulations, and the next thing you know, you're tamping down production and you're increasing the cost of production, and thereby increasing the cost to the end user. I do think, and we do have to be mindful of this, we only had 1 week of winter here in Texas last year, but it was a bad one. What if we had a whole month that was bad? What if we had a whole month that was bad, not just in Texas, but around the world? We're going to need the energy that's produced in Carroll State and the energy that's produced in our state to be able to keep people warm, to keep homes heated. So let's not be so aggressive that we stymie the sources that we know we're going to need. We can do so responsibly. This country has a history of doing that. This country is in the forefront of doing that. And to further damage the ability of this country to produce would be literally to the detriment of the rest of the world as well.
Would Representatives Gonzalez or Miller like to weigh in on this one?
Yeah, no, I agree with Michael. And I think, you know, anytime you try to regulate, you're going to get it wrong. You will quickly get into the realm of over-regulation. And it's just a difficult needle to thread. I would take it another way. Instead of kind of using the stick approach with regulation, use the carrot approach and, incentivize the industry to be more efficient, to utilize technology. I served 20 years in the Navy as a cryptologist. Technology and information is at the forefront of every industry, and that's been one of the things that I think we need to highlight more of what the oil and gas industry has done in order to be more efficient in the process. Because guess what? Not only does that help the bottom line, but it also helps the overall impact of global climate. And this is another area that I think we need to lean into. And instead of trying to shine away and being on the defensive in this realm, we need to be on the offensive. And we need to be able to challenge these folks that go, if you truly do care about emissions control, then you would encourage some of these innovations in the industry to take place. Not try to shackle them with over-regulation. And ultimately, what I want to see is America have the cleanest, most efficient oil and gas around, where it makes it at a disadvantage for others that are selling their product. And I think there's a way to do that from a government standpoint, from a federal standpoint, where we encourage that, where we spark that, where we spur that innovation, vice, curb it with overregulation.
I think you favored, and correct me if I'm wrong, an expansion of the renewable fuel standard as a way to reduce emissions and maybe as an opportunity to strengthen production. Do you want to expound on that for a minute?
No, I think that was that to me.
Mm-hmm.
Corey? Yeah. No, I think that's the key. The key is that there is this. I think there's a way for us to have an all of the above energy approach, where it's not just winners and losers, where everybody can go along and be successful in that realm. And when you incentivize some of these areas, I think that's great. I think that's key. That's key to it. The reality is oil and gas is not going away anytime soon. Regardless of all the attacks on the other side that are coming, but we have to protect against that. We have to do that in a manner that leans into it and goes, no. This is an industry that takes efficiency into the equation. This is an industry that leans towards technology. Like Michael was talking about earlier. There are ways to absolutely do that, but I believe we need to start leading that conversation instead of being on backpedaling and being against the ropes on it.
Excellent. So I think we might have time for one more. We'll squeeze in two if we can do it. But for the next one, I thought we might go to Representative Miller and ask about CCUS. The DOE has announced some 24 million in funding for 9 research projects to explore and develop new methods of capturing and storing carbon from the air. How does Congress intend to continue the momentum for funding new carbon capture facilities, and kind of what needs to happen to get this technology to a point where it can be economically deployed?
Well, I also have to comment that it's so important that we do keep an all of the above approach to energy as a country, and let the market dictate as we move forward, because we are leaders and we have to continue to lead. We need to lead in carbon capture. We've got different legislation. We've got the 45Q, where we need to make tax credits permanent. We've got a Carbon Capture Modernization Act right now that several of us have sponsored. And so we can be retrofitting existing units. We can do all kinds of things, but there seems to be the ability to cut off your nose to spite your face, as they say. It's an old expression, but that's what we have been doing for the last 8-9 months. And we need to use what we have available and keep on researching and keep incentivizing the industry, because we are the cleanest. I mean, our country is so far ahead of all the other countries in what we're doing. And so I think it's very important that we do, allow more applications through, allow more things to happen in order for us to do what we do well. I spent 2 days last week going around with the gas guys to different areas in little old West Virginia, who has a very long history with the gas and oil industry, and just seeing how far it's come since I first started dealing with Marcellus Shale, and how we had to, as a state, put in a framework on how we did, the extracting in that manner, and how far we have come since then, and how professional and how clean it is, and how well they are taking care of things. And I think we, as a Congress, need to incentivize as opposed to put on more regulations that just make it so much harder for us to do what we do well, and that we should be incentivizing and rewarding people who are good stewards and who do things the right way.
Excellent. Fantastic discussion, everyone. I think we have to leave it there, but thanks to our representatives, Cuellar, Miller, Burgess, and Gonzalez. They have lots of important work in front of them in the coming months, and we'll be following it closely. Thank you. Thank you again, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Great. Corey, thanks for that. I think we had some bipartisan breakthrough there, so well done. And thanks to the members who took time out of their busy schedule to participate today. It was fantastic. For all of those of you that are watching and listening along, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A function. We're happy to put those forth to the panelists. And without further ado, let me introduce our next moderator. He's a gentleman by the name of Justin Jacobs, and we work with Justin on a regular basis. He's the energy reporter for the Financial Times, covers domestic and international energy issues, and I believe now is an official resident of the Lone Star State. So you have another Texan on board there. He's going to lead a discussion today on the global demand for clean, renewable energy. So with that said, Justin, over to you.
Thanks for that. I am indeed in Houston, but not sure if I can call myself a Texan just yet. Thanks for joining us, everyone. I've got a good panel here lined up for you. The name of this panel is Global Demand for Clean, Renewable Energy. And we have a good panel lined up here. We have Frank Macchiarola, who is Senior Vice President at the American Petroleum Institute. We have Paul Bledsoe, who is President of Bledsoe and Associates. We have Karen Alderman Harbert, pardon me, who is President and CEO of the American Gas Association. And we have Jason Modglin, who is President of the Texas Alliance of Energy Producers. So I think, we should just jump straight in here. I think there's a lot I wanted to discuss with you guys. Everything from what we're seeing in the market right now, against the backdrop of this discussion around the energy transition and kind of surging fossil fuel prices. We have COP26 coming up in a few weeks here. And we have, potentially some of the most important energy legislation the US has seen in quite a long time being debated in DC. So a lot to discuss. And so let's jump in here. I wanted to start with kind of the news of the day, kind of surging natural gas, oil, coal, electricity prices around the world right now. Obviously, this is happening against the backdrop of a discussion around the energy transition. Frank, maybe I can start with you. What's your takeaway right now from what you're seeing around these various markets, and kind of how you think this is going to influence the discussion and policies around the energy transition?
Yeah, thanks for your question, Justin, and thanks to Sean for hosting this great event, and to the panelists who I'm joining. So, it's not a big surprise if you think about the price environment that we're in. First, you have basic supply and demand fundamentals, which is sort of the reverse of what we saw at the outset of the pandemic. We see surging demand levels last week that were around, in the US, 21.5 million barrels per day of oil demand. Well, you have a drop off of about 2 million barrels from last week compared to the week before the lockdown of the pandemic. That's a significant drop in supply. And so you see that reflected in price. At the same time, you see market sentiment being influenced by both the larger discussion around energy transition. So that tempers the ambitions of folks to go out and make capital investment in resources. And you also see a public policy kind of overlapping this, a public policy environment that makes it difficult to provide regulatory and legislative certainty for folks to be willing to make those capital investments. That combination of factors, I think one added factor globally is OPEC's decisions, which are consistent, at least with during the pandemic, to make decisions to influence the market in negative ways. So all of that confluence of factors, I think, reflects the oil side. I think natural gas, you're seeing similar things. And so that's my take, Justin.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. So I guess you think this kind of dynamic might be with us, at least through the winter and maybe going into next year?
Certainly can't project prices going forward, but the conditions are certainly there for continued demand. Presumably COVID stays consistent with where it is, and those same market signals that I discussed don't change.
Karen, maybe if I can turn to you on the same topic. Frank mentioned natural gas there. Natural gas is all of a sudden, certainly in my paper, in the headlines every day at the top of the website, and even on the physical paper. Prices are very high around the world, not quite as high here in the US, but still much higher than we've seen in recent years. A similar kind of question, what is your takeaway from what we're seeing on these prices? Did you see similar kind of disincentive for investment holding back supply?
Sure.
What's your takeaway from what you're seeing?
Well, thanks, Justin, and great to be with everybody. And thanks to Sean. Wish we could all be in person, but we will make this work. In fact, you probably get more people because everybody can jump on and do this. Well, look, you're absolutely right. We are better off here. We can only look back to 2008 when we had hurricanes Katrina and Rita, and natural gas prices here, because we didn't have supply, went up to $15, $16, and it was really hard to attract even at that price because Europe was hungry for natural gas. And you look 13 years later, we're awash in natural gas, and right now Europe is paying $25 versus our $5.50 here. And I think that underscores the point of the delicate balance that one has to look forward. I mean, great, it's good news that the economy is rebounding. So let's not forget that, but there are constraints in the energy markets. And it also underscores that we've got to get this policy for energy transition right. Right now in China, their hydro didn't perform. And so now they're trying to find any molecule they can on the market to go into China. And Europe, suffered a pause in some of their wind. over the, the course of the summer. And so now they're taking up more natural gas. And of course, here in the United States and in Europe, we had a pretty rough winter, particularly in your state of Texas, that took a lot of gas out of storage. Right now in Europe, they are at a decade low in storage. Fortunately, here in the United States, we're about 7% below the 5-year average. But we're going to have to really pay attention to utility bills as people are coming out of this pandemic. We're going to have to really pay attention to our customers. And of course, many of my utilities, are prevented from cutting off, customers during the winter, which is a good thing. And they honor that. We're not suggesting otherwise, but it is going to get tough. And I'm hoping that supply does obviously catch up. And there's many programs to help customers. But I want to, this is not the time to be thinking about how to tax the energy industry. You can see this is a pocketbook issue, and Congress right now is debating a tax on natural gas. So if they're successful in passing that in the reconciliation package, utility bills will go up an additional 12 to 30%. So as prices are going up, now's not the time to tax that. And so we're trying to explain that to people on Capitol Hill. Let's work together to keep all the options on the table. Natural gas enables renewables. So that's good for the market. So let's be smart about this and not rush it and see ourselves looking a little bit more like Europe than we'd like.
Yeah, one of the issues that's come up as prices have risen is you've seen people, manufacturing association, manufacturing sector, kind of raise this issue that potentially it's LNG exports that are helping to drive up, prices here in the U.S. Again, prices are not as high as in the U.S. as they are, outside of the U.S., but they are much higher, and it's going to hit people's pocketbooks and it's going to hit manufacturers. What's your response to that argument from them that maybe we should pull back LNG exports, as prices are rising to protect U.S. consumers?
Well, I mean, I'm a free market person, so I don't think we should be constraining anything. And if you think about our ambition in energy transition to reduce emissions worldwide, not just in Texas, not just in the United States, the emissions don't know boundaries, particularly country boundaries. We should be supportive of LNG exports because they're going to help other countries reduce their emissions, transitioning from coal to gas or from wood to gas. You look at, the previous panel mentioned India. India is the fastest growing, democracy on the planet, and they are energy hungry. And we should be, able to provide them natural gas because their emissions are fastly racing ahead, as is China, as is us. We should be able to use natural gas as a way to reduce emissions. And so I do see, LNG exports as also, an economic stimulant. But we do need to look at Europe. I mean, they're shuttering some fertilizer plants and some energy intensive industries. We certainly wouldn't want to see that here after we just attracted those back from the Middle East. And our farmers are pretty excited about having environmentally friendly, affordable fertilizer. I don't think we're going to get to that point in the United States. And I hope that every, from the upstream to the midstream to the downstream, we are all working together to make sure this market is well supplied. And of course, investing in energy efficiency so our customers can reduce their consumption. And that's important. We invest $4 million every day in energy efficiency for our customers, $91 million on safety and to reduce emissions. So we're putting our money where our mouth is to help everybody have what they need. We're going into winter and also to keep bills affordable.
Yeah, thanks for that. So I guess the flip side of that question is, is there anything that the U.S. Gas industry and the LNG industry can do to get more supply on the global markets to help ease some of the price pressure that you're seeing, in Asia and Europe?
Well, I know if they want to buy it, our producers are willing to sell it for sure. I mean, but let's be honest, it's getting harder to build infrastructure in this country. You can't just wave a magic wand and have an LNG export facility, much less the pipe out of the Permian, for example, to get it to the export facility. So, if we want to build back better, we actually have to build and make it easier, not harder, to build badly needed energy infrastructure to deliver clean natural gas to our market and all around the world. So let's build to accommodate that surging demand.
Great, thanks for that. So Paul, maybe if I can turn to you. This whole kind of surge in fossil fuel prices, obviously playing out against this backdrop of the energy transition, and kind of global discussions around how fast we should be moving towards renewable energy and kind of clean technologies. How do you think that this surge in fossil fuel prices plays into that debate? I mean, do you think that this slows down? Is this a setback for the transition, or is this an argument for no, we need to accelerate to get off of these fuels?
Thanks, Justin. It's a good question. Just quickly on natural gas, I think the U.S. has a huge opportunity to demethanize our gas, to have the lowest methane gas in the world, and to actually market our gas to the rest of the world as the way to reduce emissions. I think there's a huge opportunity for the industry and the Biden administration to work together on that. Right now, people are importing gas both to get away from higher emitting coal, but we also see Russian gas, which is 40% of total EU gas, which has higher methane emissions than US gas. So I think this emphasis on demethanizing coal by the Biden administration is a very pro-industry position, and I think there's a lot of opportunity for the administration and industry to work together there. I think more broadly that Karen and Frank are right that natural gas does provide work in tandem with renewable energy because the new gas plants can cycle up so quickly. So gas has a big role there. But we do have to also make longer term investments in technology and infrastructure if we're going to integrate ever greater amounts of renewable and other zero emissions energy into the grid. And so, a lot of these investments are in the bipartisan infrastructure bill before Congress and in the reconciliation bill. I think those are really important investments. I agree with the other panelists that the U.S. has the opportunity as the world's technology leader to lead the clean energy revolution with these investments. But we also have to put our money where our mouth is, right? In order to be respected and for our exports to be welcome, we do have to meet our emissions pledges. And I think the Biden administration has got this just about right, that we have to act domestically, both on technology and policy to reduce our emissions. And that will open up global markets, and our technologies and our policy innovations can help reduce global emissions. So I really think this is a two-step process. I hope Congress will pass the bipartisan infrastructure bill and much of the reconciliation agenda, especially on climate and energy.
Yeah, it's a great point. Obviously we saw kind of last year an LNG deal kind of run into problems because of concerns around, at least partly around concerns around emissions. I mean, is it your view that some of these things, some of the environmental standards are actually probably beneficial for the industry's competitiveness globally, even
no
if
question about
they
it.
don't love it?
I think the industry is making huge investments on reducing their methane and other emissions. We see this both by the gas producers, and we see it on the LNG exporters. For example, Cheniere in the next year is going to have each one of their shipments have complete life cycle emissions reporting and information. And I think where we're headed is that gas is going to be judged on its total life cycle emissions. And it can show that those emissions will be much lower than coal, and that US gas will be lower than our competitors, including Russia especially, who has an incredibly high fugitive emissions rate, but also other competitors like those from the Middle East. So a huge opportunity for gas to play a key role as part of these other clean technology investments in helping the world decarbonize. And that's certainly true of Asia. You're about to see demand for gas in Asia explode as they attempt to get off coal, both for its air pollution problems and for its climate problems. So I think there's more agreement here between the industry and the Biden administration than may meet the eye.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. Maybe we can get back to that a little bit more later. One of the spaces I think is really interesting that's happening right now is some of these satellites monitoring of methane emissions, which really gives a way for buyers to look across the globe and really kind of benchmark these things.
Right. And they've shown massive emissions from Russian gas, right? I mean, we've got these huge bellowing emissions. I mean, that system is a black box, right? They have not allowed any inspections, whereas the US has monitoring and verification of our emissions, and industry is driving them down. I think US emissions of methane will be under 1% very soon, if they're not already. And Russian methane emissions are at least 5 to 7%, which makes it worse than coal from a climate perspective. So I think there's a very important geopolitical, economic, and climate opportunity here for US gas. And I'm hoping it will bring the industry and the administration and environmental climate advocates like me together to see a way forward here.
Great. So Jason, maybe I can bring you in right now. What's your view from Texas? I mean, these surging prices are a big windfall for Texas energy, oil and gas producers, of course, a big financial windfall. So from that perspective, probably a good thing. But yeah, what are your takeaways from what we're seeing?
No, absolutely. And thank you, Justin, and welcome to Texas, and Sean and your team at the port. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Look, we know that the world needs more energy. In the next 30 years, it will need to grow at least 50%. Here in the United States, another new Texan, Elon Musk, has said that our electricity grid needs to double in the next few years in order to take advantage of the electric cars coming onto the grid. That might be an optimistic viewpoint, but most advocates have said that our energy grid needs to grow. And where are you going to get that energy source from? It's not by subtracting our energy sources in this country, it's by adding. And that's the same view if you look across the globe. We need more energy if we're going to enable renewable energy sources like wind and solar. They need a backstop, and that backstop is natural gas. It's really the only fuel technology and feedstock able to scale up quickly in order to cover the intermittency of these renewables. We absolutely have a great opportunity in Texas to meet the needs of our friends in Europe, our friends in India, and in Asia, and also our friends in Massachusetts and New York that frankly are limited in their infrastructure, don't have the ability to tap in to natural gas supplies in this country, and therefore have to rely on spot market pricing and imports from Trinidad and Tobago and Russia to meet their LNG needs. That's unfortunate. It's something that, again, we need to focus on infrastructure. We've been able to do it in Texas, driving down our emissions significantly. I was so happy to hear Paul talk about Russian emissions. The Railroad Commission of Texas reports venting and flaring in Texas is about 0.57%. You compare that to Russia in any given year, and it's closer to 16 to 17%. Really unfortunate to see that Paris deal fall through on the import of Texas LNG, because it made them more reliant on Russian natural gas rather than looking for lower emission opportunities around the globe.
Jason, maybe I can get your view on oil prices at $80, natural gas at $5 plus. I mean, do you expect output from the Permian and elsewhere in Texas to start picking up here as we go into 2022 to respond to some of these prices and kind of higher demand?
It's certainly going to grow a little bit. Texas has bounced back a little quicker than the rest of the country, but we still have a great deal of discipline in operators. And then we have a high amount of uncertainty, both in lending and then also in the policy landscape. It would be fantastic, as Paul mentioned, if the administration would champion American energy and really the desire to grow clean energy sources here in the United States. That would be a tremendous opportunity for this administration and for the industry to come together. I hope that we ramp back very quickly, but I don't see that happening. It's going to be slow growth, and that's going to be higher prices for the foreseeable future.
So slow growth there. So Maybe we can shift a little bit here, our perspective to what's coming up in a few weeks here, COP26, major international climate negotiations. Paul, I know you have to leave us here in a couple of minutes, so maybe I can start with you. I mean, what are you watching on COP26? Are you, the US and EU are kind of leading things here. Do you think that others are going to come along as well, or do you think we're headed for a bit of a disaster here potentially?
Thanks, Justin. I will be in Glasgow for much of the meetings, and I think there are some bright spots. I think the commitments by the EU and US are really huge. It's important to put those in perspective. They're incredibly ambitious. They're going to be difficult to meet, but they are showing the world that there is leadership. I also think the methane pledge that the US and EU have now made, and just the other day, 24 new countries joined that pledge. I think that's going to be a very large focus. I also think there's big opportunity for these prices, especially in oil, to lead toward a greater decarbonized transportation globally. We have to recognize that we have to reach all sectors, but ultimately we're going to have to decarbonize transportation, and it does seem as electrification is the near most likely option there. It does mean we're going to have greater electricity demand, and we're going to have to realize that. I thought it was also good news that the Biden administration pledged additional money, as much as $15 billion a year for the Green Climate Fund. We have to recognize that climate change impacts are going to have huge costs. This discussion can't be held in a vacuum. Climate change impacts are going to cost everyone massive amounts of money. They're already costing Americans hundreds of billions of dollars a year. And so addressing climate change is in the interest of our long-term economy, not just the climate. And we really do have to gain that perspective. And that does ask, I think, more of the US and the global electricity industry. I think we need to ramp up our adoption of technologies that are going to allow for a much more sophisticated global electricity system that can store electricity and that can deliver it. I think that's really the ultimate challenge. I am worried that the Chinese are not going to make a new pledge. I have urged them in every form possible to do so. I think they are the key. We cannot bend down the global emissions curve until China, 28% of global emissions, begins to reduce their emissions. I think they're going to face renewed pressure in light of EU and US action. And, the final thing I would say is that we need to recognize that this is a social justice issue, that less wealthy nations, younger people around the world are looking at this issue very differently from how those of us who've worked in the industry may look at it. They look at it as an issue of human rights and social justice. We have to be very sensitive to that, or we risk losing the license to operate for this transition. So we really need to balance here, but I'm hopeful that all of those factors together will add for at least a semi-successful conference. We're not going to meet the pledges needed to keep temperatures under 2 degrees C. It's not going to happen, but we're moving closer to that.
Maybe one more question before we lose you here, Paul. How important is it? I think that's a great point, by the way, on the social justice issue and the way that kind of young people outside the industry kind of view this. How important is it for the Biden administration to get, the reconciliation legislation and some of the climate provisions in that passed before the conference, so they show up with something concrete to kind of pull people along?
I think that's a great point, Justin. It's crucial momentum. We need to pass both the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which has a lot of very important climate investments, investments, over $120 billion, including on things like a smart grid. And then we do need to pass at least many of the climate components in the reconciliation bill. I think I agree that the methane tax is probably unneeded right now, but we do need to pass those two bills ahead of Glasgow to really jumpstart global momentum and to put the U.S. in a position to more effectively pressure China, Russia, and Brazil, and other major emitters who are not cutting their emissions as.
Thanks, Paul. So Frank, maybe turn to you. The oil and gas industry's perspective going into COP26 here. What are you guys looking for? I mean, and do you think this has the potential to, kind of meaningfully tilt the energy investment landscape and the kind of trajectory of the future energy mix?
So I think Paul was touching on it just as he got cut off, which is the administration needs to hold other countries to account for their emissions as well. It's a global problem in nature, and it's all of our jobs to work on the solution. They took that approach on energy prices. They went out and immediately looked globally to address energy prices, talking to OPEC and asking them to increase their supply while taking a policy at home to decrease our supply. They ought to take a global approach on climate. We have as an industry, laid out a plan for addressing the climate challenge. We released it in early March of this year, the Climate Action Framework, which really is a combination of energy policies that we're advancing, really centered around innovation and technology on low and zero carbon emission technologies like CCUS and hydrogen, and also around steps that the industry can take, whether it's providing cleaner fuels for consumers or mitigating our emissions in our own operations through reductions in methane and flaring and in refinery emissions. And finally, probably the proposal that got the most attention was our proposal for an economy-wide price on carbon. We think that's the most meaningful way to address the challenge, to put an economy-wide price on carbon. Unfortunately, every time we've taken a step, the administration or Congress has decided to take a step in the opposite direction. So we've supported the direct regulation of methane and want to work with the Biden administration on smart methane regulation. We've supported a carbon price across the economy and want to work with the administration and Congress on that. Along comes this natural gas tax, which attempts to address methane, but really only addresses 29% of methane in the economy and doesn't really address methane. It just places a tax on our industry, which is duplicative. It's punitive in nature. It doesn't work. It could cost up to 90,000 jobs and $9 billion in the economy under our estimates. So, Paul mentioned the reconciliation bill. I don't think there's really anything in there that we should be advancing. It restricts our access in the House Natural Resources Committee to our own resources in the United States. It taxes the single most important resource in driving down emissions over the past decade. Why would you want to tax that? You would want to promote that if you were for reducing emissions. It also unfairly places a tax burden on our own operators internationally in the tax provisions from Ways and Means. And so, I echo Karen's statement on reconciliation. It's really the wrong direction. It sort of surprises us when we see the administration say that that's the solution to climate. That gets us to the commitments made by the administration. We just view it very differently.
Yeah, I want to get back to to the legislation in DC a little bit more, but Frank, maybe one more question. I mean, at COP26, would you like to see CCS and hydrogen and some of these things that the industry is investing in kind of
Absolutely.
put
And
front and center.
and exports. I mean, it's pretty shocking to hear the debate now turning to, not just oil exports, but LNG exports. LNG exports has the potential to take the progress that we've made here in fuel switching to natural gas and help others around the world achieve their Paris commitments. And at the same time, be an economic driver here in the United States, in Texas. Our industry supports over 11 million jobs in the US economy, about 8% of the economy. In Texas, that's 2.5 million jobs, over 600,000 direct jobs into the Texas economy. So why would we want to reduce that potential for other countries through export policy? It really is short-sighted. And again, the administration is really promoting policies to, address short-term issues that are arising, and those are not solutions to the challenges that the country faces.
Karen, can turn to you here now. Natural gas has a really interesting role in these discussions around the energy transition and around COP26, whether it's included in the discussions, included in the process, whether it's considered a big debate in Europe right now, whether it's considered a clean fuel. What are your expectations around that discussion, and what are the things that the industry itself can do to ensure it continues to have a large and kind of potentially growing role in the energy in the transition?
Sure. Well, just to echo what Frank just said, I mean, natural gas is going to be essential to meet our climate change aspirations. And we've seen what it can do on a large scale in the United States, and we should be celebrating that. So as the Biden administration, goes to Glasgow, what I'd like to see them do is to be more inclusive of the tools that we're going to need to address this worldwide challenge, not exclusive. And right now they're excluding options. And I don't think that benefits us here in the United States, nor all the countries around the world that are struggling with, energy poverty. We still have 1.5 billion people that don't have access to any form of modern energy. And we certainly shouldn't be trying to exercise, our authority and our leadership to deprive them of those opportunities to thrive and become a modernized economy, just like we did. And we've got more to do. And I think the focus for the administration should be on leading on innovation. You mentioned hydrogen. I mean, we've got 2.7 million miles of pipeline in this country, and we're using it today for natural gas. We also have the opportunity for renewable natural gas as we go forward, and to pioneer that here, to solve an agricultural problem, land waste problem, and blend some of that into our system. We've got 157 of those projects already up and running. That could help developing countries that have a big agricultural economy solve some of their emissions problems. Hydrogen. We would like to see the administration actually invest some R&D dollars in hydrogen, not just for transportation, but for actually direct use in homes and businesses. We've got 180 million Americans that use natural gas in this country, and I like to remind the administration that's more people than voted in the last election for both parties. So, it's an important part of this economy. It's an important part of our quality of life. And as they go into COP26, they really need to be mindful to flex the innovation muscle to help us and the world solve, our climate change problems, and not to take, natural gas or any other technology, frankly, off the table to help solve energy demand and environmental aspirations.
Do you think that the industry is going to have to adopt, CCS along with, gas, whether it's a gas-fired power plants or export plants and things like that, and find other ways to kind of, strip out carbon from the gas value chain to ensure its role in the
Sure.
in the transition?
I mean, I know from our industry and our members, we made some significant climate commitments in January of last year to continue to reduce both methane and CO2 emissions of our systems and our customers. And since 1990, that sounds like a long time ago, but we've reduced methane emissions 73% in our distribution systems, which is a significant accomplishment that nobody wants to acknowledge. The using of natural gas in this country has brought CO2 emissions to 27-year lows. I don't see that kind of progress in Europe. We should be celebrating that, but we've all said we need to do more, and we will. Whether it's CCUS, whether it is these other advanced fuels. I mean, there's also high-end, natural gas appliances that, have been improved and are available on the marketplace. And I think that the rush to try and convince everyone that the solution to climate change in the United States is to electrify everything is extremely short-sighted, because we know how hard it is to build the infrastructure today just to meet today's energy demand. If we needed to electrify everything, we'd have to quadruple the size of the electric grid. And by the way, it wouldn't be all on the back of wind and solar. Natural gas would still be at the table. So it's either going to be used in a molecule format or an electron format, and one is going to be a lot more expensive than the other. So we need that blend. I think the industry, from Frank's perspective and the upstream, they're reducing emissions. Midstream has made commitments. We've made commitments, and we're all in. But to tax us out of existence is going to provide fewer options, not more options.
And Jason, if I can maybe turn to you, and maybe we can turn our discussion kind of to the last topic we have here around legislation in DC and policy from the Biden administration over the last his first 10 months or so in office now. What's your view on the administration's record so far, and kind of what you're expecting to see from this legislation, what you're hoping to see?
Yeah, we're concerned that their rhetoric really hasn't matched up with the actions. We continue to see prices go higher. Price gasoline approaching $1.50 for increase from a year ago. Natural gas prices have doubled as well in that time period. And we know energy costs are a substantial portion of lower income Americans' overall budget. Some 30% is their energy cost. And so as we're seeing price increases, increasing cost in energy, that's negatively affecting them. That's hurting Americans all across the country. The Department of Energy released a study at the beginning of the year that lower natural gas prices, the affordable, abundant supply of natural gas and oil in the country, reduced cost for Americans by $2,500 for a family of four. That's a tremendous tax saving. That's a tremendous economic stimulus that, again, the administration can champion with clean energy fuels here in the United States. We talked a little bit about COP26 before, and so great to hear Karen talk about energy poverty and energy insecurity. We certainly hope that World Forum focuses on that effort to meet those economies and those people around the world that have demands for energy, but unfortunately are burning biomass. They're burning dung and home hearths, subjecting some 4.5 million people, according to the World Health Organization, with premature death because of indoor air pollution. So we have the solutions here in the United States. Let's unlock those solutions. Let's have a champion in the Biden administration to promote American energy. And we can certainly come together. Frank's group has done a tremendous amount of work around the environmental partnership. Just as Karen has mentioned, the opportunities for the market to innovate and lower emissions, as opposed to government mandate that frankly hasn't met the needs of either the market or our goals to reduce our emissions.
So, Jason, and we're running out of time here pretty quickly, but maybe Frank, if I can just get one last question to you very quickly here. You mentioned the carbon price there, and it seems like sort of out of nowhere, this carbon price seems to have maybe a second chance in these discussions around the reconciliation bill. What's your view on those discussions, and do you think there's a realistic chance that some kind of carbon price might come out of this?
Look, we're hopeful to advance a carbon price through Congress, but this overall package has a lot of problems. As I mentioned, the methane fee, the CEPP, which does not take into account natural gas, the taxes on the industry, the House Natural Resources provisions that restrict access, the electrification provisions that create an unlevel playing field in transportation. I think about the Biden administration's approach to prices, and it's instructive to think about their full energy and environment approach. They were faced with this increase in prices, which, up until over the past decade, food, education, and healthcare costs have all risen by double digits, and the price of energy has declined by 14% up until 2010. And the reason was because of innovation and technology here in the United States. And so what they've done when faced with a price crisis is look somewhere else. They've talked to OPEC. What they've done here in the United States is suggest an investigation of pricing at the FTC. They've then gone and sought out, maybe looking at the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. And then lastly, they've floated the idea of restricting oil exports. That is not a cohesive policy to address energy. And, the American people are looking for leadership on this issue, and they're not looking for energy policy that serves as pay-fors to spend on $3.5 trillion in a bill. And so, we think a better approach is to, as Jason noted, we have the resources here in the United States to be able to use our own resources to strengthen our energy security, and at the same time, reduce emissions through the series of policies that I listed, including through voluntary efforts like the Environmental Partnership, and through exporting the natural gas that we have here in the United States for other countries to be able to help their environmental footprint. So that's an energy policy.
Well, thanks for that. I think on that note, we are run up against our time here. So I want to thank Karen. I want to thank you, Frank. Thank you, Jason, and thank you to Paul, who has signed off now. And thank you to the Port of Corpus Christi for hosting us today. Very interesting discussion, and obviously a lot more to discuss down the road. So thank you very much, and I'll hand it over.
Thanks, Justin.
Thanks, Justin.
Thank you.
Well, Justin, thank you. And we've had, I think, a great exchange today for what has truly become a major issue in our industry. And first of all, I want to make sure you all can hear me. If I can just get a nod from you, Jerry. Okay.
Yes.
Great, wonderful. So, look, I want to thank all of our participants today for this extremely thoughtful exchange. We've heard a lot from some great leaders in our industry. We heard from Congressman Cloud. We certainly heard from Congressman Cuellar, Congressman Burgess, Congressman Gonzalez, and Congresswoman Carol Miller from the great state of West Virginia, as they talked about the infrastructure bill, reconciliation, certainly what that means for the energy transition. We heard about the Carbon Capture, Use, and Storage Act, and really the need for more public policy surrounding energy transition while protecting the great energy industry that we've already developed over many, many decades. I want to also thank Frank Macchiarola from the American Petroleum Institute, Paul Bledsoe from Bledsoe and Associates, Jason Moglin from the Texas Alliance of Energy Producers, and certainly Karen Alderman Harbert, the president and CEO of the American Gas Association. That was also a great exchange, particularly about the upcoming COP26 in Glasgow and a lot of the issues that are going to be discussed there. Here again, we heard about tax policy and tax policy being used as a hammer as opposed to a real tool for promulgating more in the energy transition space. We talked a little bit about hydrogen. As many of you in our audience know, the Port of Corpus Christi is leaning in heavily in hydrogen production, as we believe that is going to be the next story in our growth trajectory here in Texas. And the fact that, I want to end on this note, the fact that Karen pointed out that we are at 27-year lows in emissions related to natural gas use, which leads the world. It just shows that there is a tremendous need for more work in the emissions impact area. And let's not stymie that by keeping this great abundant natural resource in the ground. You know, my good friend Jody Arrington, the great congressman from Lubbock, Texas, says we are really fighting the Church of Climatology and their vitriolic rhetoric around fossil fuels. Let's have an adult conversation, which we heard today, about the virtues of oil and natural gas and how that can continue to make the United States a global leader, not only in the economy, in driving the global economies, but also when it comes to climate change and reducing the impacts of greenhouse gases. I want to just thank all of our participants, certainly all of our sponsors. And this, I want to remind our audience that this has been recorded today. So you can find it on our YouTube channel. If you just go to YouTube and put Port Corpus Christi in, you'll find it on our YouTube channel. And we are certainly looking forward to seeing you all next year live in Washington, D.C. for the 3rd annual Port of Corpus Christi Texas Energy Day. Thanks again to everybody for your participation, and we look forward to seeing you again. Until then, be safe. Bye-bye.